Hey guys, welcome yet to another of what would have been my pool plan video. This time round I decided to change things around a little bit, partly because the devs didn't really release information yet on events after Astos. We have to wait for the live stream on July 24th for that, and I normally actually cover 2 events at once. So this time I really only have information on the next one event. But more importantly also, I know there is quite a lot of hype surrounding Astos, and there's probably a lot of questions surrounding whether or not he is really that good or he's deserving of the hype and why is he so good. So due to all those reasons, this time around I decided to do this video focusing really on Astos and give you a little bit more detailed breakdown on his kit. I also know that not many people really want a very long and lengthy description, so to help ease things a little bit, I will also of course include timestamps in the video description so you can use those to skip ahead to the section that you are interested in. And I will also actually put the summary first this time around so you can see the TLDR version of it, and if you want to listen to more details after that, you can just continue on with the video. So without further ado, first things first, how good is Astos actually? And to help answer that question, I've brought in 2 experts to give their opinion.
Vegeta, what did you say his power level is? It's over 9,000! 9,000?! There's no way that can be right! It can't!
Anyway, coming to the summary first, does Astos actually deserve all the hype he's getting? Yes, he is actually really that good. He really is the next level of power creep in DPS, and that's saying something considering we recently actually got Aranya, who is actually also sort of like, she was the next level up in DPS. So what makes Astos so good? Well, the long story short is that he can ignore HP damage cap, and if you build a party surrounding him that provides tons of HP damage up, buffs, effects or debuffs, and a decent amount of max brave up auras, he can actually dish out some insane numbers on the screen. What does the experts say? Well, you've just listened to 2 of them and they said that he has a power level over 9,000, so that's saying something. If you want to know more details about how his kit works and how he actually can end up dishing out a lot of damage, just continue watching and I'll provide a little bit more context surrounding this summary. First things first, regarding Astos, to really understand how he functions and to make the most use out of him, you really need to know how his overhead mechanic works. As you can see on the picture, Astos does have an overhead active on him from the start of the battle. His overhead is called Dark Matter, and the simple way to look at it I think is to just view it as sort of his ammo or ammunition pouch. The way that Astos does his damage in fights is different from the conventional way. The typical way we had until now I guess is that you build Brave by attacking the enemy and stealing their Brave, and then you sort of unload or dump this Brave in the form of HP damage. Astos does have a little bit of that in his kit, but the vast majority of his skills do damage in a different way, and that is utilizing his ammo pouch or his dark matter overhead. There is a value on his overhead as you can see on the screen. This value increases based on the amount of Brave that Astos steals when he does Brave damage. So for example, if you hit his PT plus and he does his attack, and he does like 100,000 Brave damage, this 100,000 will be added to his ammunition pouch, and the overhead will cap out at 100% of Astos' max Brave stat. For most of Astos attacks, the way that damage is done is that it takes a multiple of this overhead value and just does damage based on that towards the enemies. Importantly, this value on his overhead will never go down in the fight except if Astos gets broken. That is the only way it gets reduced. If Astos does get broken during the fight, this value will be halved, which also means that if you bring Astos to the battle, you do not want to put him in a situation where he gets broken. In case you are wondering, the way that Astos takes damage is still the same as every other character. He still of course will have his usual health and brave values at the bottom of your screen, and if he takes an attack, the brave damage will affect his brave values and obviously not his overhead. His overhead also will not go down even after he does any of his attacks and he uses up his ammunition pouch, the value remains the same. Also, while his skills does a multiple of the value on his overhead, whatever damage it comes up with, it will still be capped at whatever Astos' HP damage limit or HP damage cap is. So far, this just really means that when Astos does damage, instead of taking brave from his usual brave stats at the bottom of the screen, he does damage based on the so-called brave numbers on his overhead, but because it's capped at 100% of his max brave stat and the damage is also capped at 100% of his HP damage cap, usually you would see very similar numbers as with all other DPS characters, and emphasis on the word usually here because there is a way to surpass this limit, and I'll cover that as we go on with this video. The good thing about this pseudo brave overhead mechanic is that technically his HP damage wouldn't really be affected too much by the enemy's defense or brave damage resistances. The only exception I guess is while he builds his overhead, he does need to do some amount of brave damage to get his overhead numbers up, but once that's at 100% of his max brave stat, for the rest of the fight you can or he can really ignore the enemy's defense or brave damage resistances. With his overhead in mind, I'll move on to cover his entire kit, starting off from his S1, S2, EX and LD skills on the screen here. His S1 is Dark Trust and is a single target attack that does HP damage that's equivalent to 250% of his dark matter, which is his overhead, 10 times. So it just does 10 HP dumps. Each HP dump has a value of 250% of his dark matter, of course capped at his HP damage limit. His S2 is the AoE version of the attack. It also does 250% of his overhead, but it does 5 times the HP dumps, and this time across all enemies on the screen. His EX attack is Dark Warhammer and it's a single target HP damage that does 300% multiplier of his overhead, and it does this 9 HP dumps, followed up by 1 HP dump to all off targets, which is also equivalent to 300% of his dark matter overhead. His EX grants him one of his 2 signature framed buffs. Both his frame buffs will grant himself some bonus stats, so his EX buff grants him attack, max brave, stolen brave overflow and HP damage plus 20%. It also turns his HP attack button to a special attack called Cremation, which is an AoE brave damage followed by HP damage that is equivalent to 150% of his dark matter. It is instant turn and does not increase the turn count. This attack, since it's only 150% of his overhead, is considerably lower potency in damage, and I think normally the way you want to use this is if he somehow gets broken and you need to quickly refill his overhead, then you can use this attack since it does do brave damage. Astos' LD is called Dark Glory. It does AoE brave damage, which is nice if you want to quickly build up his overhead, and then it does AoE HP damage that's equivalent to 250% of his dark matter, and it does it in 7 times. His LD also has a framed buff that gives himself attack, max brave, brave damage and HP damage plus 30%, and also grants him 1 free skill use on his next turn. Moving on to Astos FR and BT. And I'll start off with his FR first because his BT is where all the juice lies. So his FR is called Conflict Ultima, and it does AoE Brave damage, which is another way if you want to build his overhead. And then it does AoE HP damage equivalent to 500% of his Dark Matter overhead, 4 times across all enemies. During Astos' Force Time, firstly, very importantly, all party members get a bonus plus 50% to HP damage done, and this is also very relevant to his kit. Astos has 2 conditionals to his Force Time. The first requires you to do a magic attack on your turn for plus 30% force gauge bonus. The next requires you to end your turn with your character having an overhead, which gives plus 40%. As a main FR, this isn't actually one of the best, because beyond Astos, not many characters can fulfill both conditions at once. However, that being said, if you are using Astos, you actually want to go into Astos BT plus FR and BT mode anyway and have him do all the damage. So it doesn't really matter whether or not other characters can make a lot of use out of it. And in case you're wondering why do we want Astos to be the one going into BT mode, that's where his BT comes in, and I'll move on to that. Astos' BT is called Flare Star, and it does AoE Brave and HP damage. So Flare Star is the attack in his entire kit that does damage the conventional way. It just straight up does, the usual Brave attack and HP dumps. His BT aura unfortunately lasts for 6 turns only, so it is very limited, in the same way as I guess Seed Reigns is also 6 turns. While the BT aura is up, the party gets the usual aura boosts, so he gives the party a max Brave plus 50%, Brave damage cap plus 20%, HP damage plus 50%, which is pretty good, and Brave damage cap plus 30%. Importantly, and this is why I put it in red font, importantly, while his BT aura is up, all his HP damage that comes from his Dark Matter overhead can go beyond his HP damage cap. It effectively ignores whatever his HP damage cap is.
What the hell you say?
Yep, that's right. And this is what makes Astos extremely broken. This also means that if you really want to use Astos as a main DPS, his BT is mandatory. If you do not plan on getting Astos BT, then you might as well skip him altogether. The difference is really day and night. Before moving on, do take note that just his FR and BT combined, assuming both are up, gives the entire party plus 100% HP damage bonus. So I guess the question from this is, how broken is it really to have anyone break the HP damage cap? Well, while his BT aura is up, although his Dark Matter value is still kept at 100% of his max Brave stat, there is now no longer any limit to how high his HP damage can go. I'll give you an example. Say if you stack plus 200% HP damage up effects, and really this is a very easy number to meet, I decided to go a little bit more modest on the example. You can really go 300, even 400% HP damage up if you really build around him. Not forgetting, like I said earlier, his FR and BT aura both gives already plus 100% itself. So assuming you have 200% HP damage up, his overhead usually has a value of 100 to 120,000. This is also taking into consideration very little investment in M-Brave boosts. But with that sort of numbers to support him, each of his HP dump can now do about 300 to 400,000 HP damage. Compare this with all your other DPS characters who typically do maybe 180, 200,000, maybe slightly above 200,000 if you have a bit of HP damage cap up. This is already significantly higher than what you normally output. Not to mention, to pair with this, Astos himself already has very decent number of HP dumps. Of course, there are characters who has a little bit more HP dumps than him, but on the virtue that each of his dump is significantly higher, sometimes double, if not 2 to 3 times more than your other typical characters. This equals to extremely high or significantly higher damage output than any other DPS character in the game. Not to mention also that this mechanic of course scales very well with force time. So how do you actually maximize Astos HP damage? Astos is not plug and play. You can't just put him in any party and expect him to just automatically dish out crazy amounts of damage. He does need some level of support, and the more you build around him, the more crazy he gets. Because there is now no longer any limit on his HP damage, you can go as high as the high heavens themselves. First things first, because Astos ignores HP damage cap up, something that is very different with him is that you actually want to ignore HP damage cap up effects. In the Shinryu era, this aura or buff was actually the most important one, but not so much in Astos' case because he technically doesn't have a cap any longer. Instead, what you want to get is HP damage up, buffs, effects, or debuffs. This wasn't so important with other DPS characters because they normally have a cap and it doesn't take a lot of HP damage up effects anyway to hit the cap, and anything beyond that doesn't give you any extra damage. This time around, whatever percentage you get is automatically applied to Astos' dark matter overhead. So HP damage up is the way to go with him. Once you get HP damage up, get more HP damage up, and then look at your party again and try to squeeze in as much more HP damage up effects as you can. HP damage up is the first important stat for Astos. The second most important stat for him would be max brave up. This is also a very important stat to buff for Astos because his dark matter overhead value is normally capped at 100% of his max brave value. So in simplistic terms, the higher or the more max brave buffs you give Astos, the higher his overhead number can go, and the higher the overhead number can go, the more crazy it gets when it gets multiplied by his attacks. So to sum up, get HP damage up effects, get max brave up effects for Astos. That's really it for this video. This brings me to the end of this video. Once Astos releases, I am definitely pulling for him, and I will of course be doing a couple of runs with him just to showcase how crazy he gets. So in case if you are still on the fence of whether you want to pull him, I would recommend to just hang on and maybe watch some videos to see whether he fits your tastes. But he does very well, and even in JP up to this day, he is still one of the best HP damage dealers in the game. Hope this video has been helpful, and as always, if you enjoyed the content, do leave a like, comment and subscribe. Till then, I'll see you guys in the next pull plan video. Bye!